Welcome, folks. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I am excited and have the privilege of welcoming today Kati Morton, who is a friend of mine and a local clinician. And my name is Jessica, and I oversee mental health and well being at YouTube. And I'm very excited because Kati is also a YouTuber. So she is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a master's degree in clinical psychology from Pepperdine. Over the past 10 years, she's leveraged social media to share mental health information worldwide through her videos. She's well known for her YouTube channel, of course, which has over 1 million subscribers and garnered over 80 million views. In addition to her channel and strong presence on social media, she has appeared on KTLA's Morning News, Fox 11 Good Day LA Morning Show, and was showcased in Europe's highest circulated magazine, Glamour UK. She is also a 2019 Shorty Award finalist, as well as a 2019 and 2020 Streamy nominee. And her first book, Are You Okay? A Guide to Caring for Your Mental Health, was released in December 2018. We have another Talks about that book if you want to check that out as well. And today we're going to be talking about her work and her second book, Traumatized, Identify, Understand, and Cope with PTSD and Emotional Stress. This book was just released last month. So welcome, Kati, and I'm excited to dive in with you. I will pass it to you for your talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back. And like I was saying before we started, I wish this could be in person, but I'll do my best. Just imagine me pacing along a stage because I like to move a lot when I talk. Um, so let's just jump into what trauma is. And I want to start by sharing a personal story. When I was in college, I actually had a not so good boyfriend, as a lot of us did. And he struggled with drugs and alcohol, but I was too naive to really understand what was going on. And broke up with him. I'd had enough. He was unpredictable. I couldn't count on him, and kind of spiraling out of control. And I was there. I went to Pepperdine. I paid for my own schooling. So I was like, I need to get this together. I need to focus. I need to, focus on my studies and not so much on his chaotic existence. And one night he had called and he was like, I just really want to talk to you. I want to kind of, get some closure on things. And, I just would really like to see you. And I thought, okay, that sounds pretty normal. That sounds pretty healthy. I'd love to talk. That's fine. So I go downstairs and he's in his car and he's like, you can get in. I'd like to chat or whatever. And as soon as I get in the car, he takes off at a crazy racing speed. And if anybody hasn't been to Pepperdine, it's right along what is known as Pacific Coast Highway, which is a highway that people go 60 miles an hour on. And he is driving crazily with me in the car, going probably 90 miles an hour down PCH. And I am terrified. I start texting all of my roommate. I start calling my friends. I'm trying to figure out if I can open the door and duck out and roll onto the street. Could I survive that? We come to light and I attempt to get out. He locks the doors. He won't let me in. Finally, after much coercion from me, he pulls off to the side of the road and I get out and I wait until my roommate comes and gets me. Now, that was pretty scary. I felt pretty overwhelmed. But I'm going to be honest, I talked about it with friends for a couple of days and then thought, I'm kind of making it out to be a bigger deal than it really was. And I'm okay. And it was like, 5 minutes of me being scared, right? I brushed it off. However, I continued to have nightmares of this happening again or of worse things happening in that car ride and us getting into a horrific accident or one or both of us dying. And now, flash forward, luckily, that was, I was 19 at the time. So that was almost 20 years ago. I realized that what happened to me was a trauma. And too often in society, we use the word trauma so loosely that people like myself at the age of 19 think that couldn't have been isn't trauma when you're, or isn't trauma what happens to people who've used in childhood? I'm an adult. Like I made a decision to get into that car and I was okay. I survived, right? That's not trauma. Well, I'm here to tell you that trauma can look and feel a lot of different ways. Trauma can be a big event, what we would call like a big T trauma. That can be something like I went away to war and obviously felt threatened for my physical or emotional safety, right? Or I got into a horrific car accident. Or maybe, someone that I was close to, I watched them get into a big, bad, horrific accident. Those big T traumas are still traumatizing. However, what we don't talk enough about are little T traumas. And I don't say big and little to in any way minimize little T traumas. However, just to kind of give you an idea of the bigness of one and the kind of small yet still harmful to the other. And these traumas are things like going through a divorce, losing a job, having a chronic illness, having a surgery, moving a lot as a kid, being bullied for a short period of time. You can see how these, quote unquote, little T's can still be upsetting, can still be overwhelming, and can still traumatize us. Because if we define the term trauma, what we're really saying is that what took place threatened our physical or emotional safety, and it was too much for our brain to process in the moment. And if we just give that some time to sit, okay, I felt threatened physically or emotionally. I want to repeat that one again because emotional, we usually brush that off, right? Because I wasn't harmed physically in that car, but I was overwhelmed emotionally in the fallout of that, made me think I was overreacting, right? Nothing bad happened to me. We can say that. It didn't actually hurt me. Did it though, emotionally? It probably did. And if it's too much to process, we can develop symptoms of PTSD and be what we call traumatized. So I just wanted to, talk that through because I think unfortunately we just use terms like, oh, that meeting was so stressful, I was traumatized by it. People can say things like that without really realizing that using that term in such a way kind of diminishes those of us who are actually affected and who are actually traumatized. And I would argue that after the pandemic and kind of the dumpster fire that is 2020 and part of 2021, we've all been traumatized, right? If we think about the pandemic in general, did we fear for our or our loved ones' safety, physically or emotionally? Yes. Did we witness horrific things happening on television and in our own communities? Yes. I still remember vividly turning on the news and seeing refrigerator trucks out hospital in New York and like crying. Now, did I lose anybody personally to COVID? Thank God, no. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't affected by what was going on and that I couldn't have been traumatized myself, because I honestly believe that I was. And the grief that I still experience, and I'm sure a lot of us experience, is still very real and very palpable. And so I just want to make sure that we all understand what it means to be traumatized. And yes, it can come from one big wave, like I went to war, I was in a crash, but it can also be like a bunch of smaller waves slowly hitting us, maybe, right above the knee. And we try to catch our footing in the sand and it still pulls us out to sea and we experience symptoms of PTSD. Now, I hear all the time, how do I know if I've been traumatized? Okay, so that's the definition of trauma. Okay, let's say I'm thinking about big and little T's and I have a bunch of them but I don't know, right? Even myself in that car, after I got safely back to my dorm room, did I think I was traumatized? No. And how do I actually know looking back that I was? Well, I gave you a few kind of symptoms, right? I had nightmares. If you have nightmares or any kind of flashbacks, we talk about those a lot when it comes to PTSD. If you have any flashes back to a certain time in your life or a certain experience and you feel overcome with the anxiety or feel like you're right back in that scary situation, it's most likely you have some symptoms of PTSD and have been traumatized. And in therapy, a lot we talk about functionality. And I'll dig into this as we kind of go through the symptoms. But if you're struggling to function in your life, meaning I used to be able to do so much more. I used to be able to go to work out, make dinner for the kids and my family and do all this stuff. And now I'm tired at 3 p.m. and I haven't been going to the gym and I order out. I am not able to cook food for my family anymore. I'm too tired. Everything just feels like too much work. That's a symptom that our functionality is struggling. And B, if we think that we have one of those big or little T traumas, that could be a symptom of our PTSD and kind of a little red flag that we have been traumatized. And so I think it's always important for all of us to kind of just be aware of how we like quote unquote normally function. And I have to throw in this caveat because we are still in a pandemic. Like I'm doing this virtually because we can't be in person, right? And we're still actively in it. Consider your functionality during the pandemic. That's like our functioning now. Are we able to do what we're able to do? Yes, we're all struggling. And yes, I think we could all benefit from therapy at this moment. But I just want to throw that out there because I think we all could agree that our ability to function in our lives has been somewhat shaken by the pandemic. And that's okay. It doesn't mean we shouldn't talk to someone about it, but your new norm might be a little bit different than what it was in 2019. So just keep that in mind. Now, getting into a little bit more of the signs and symptoms we have been traumatized, things like hypervigilance. And if you don't know what that means, that's like a we hear a loud noise, I'm sent into panic. I jump. I overreact to a stimulus. Now, we use the term overreaction a lot of times I feel like as a judgmental term, like, oh, you just overreacted to that. As a therapist, overreactions are amazing little, like almost like an Easter egg of information, right? This thing happened and yeah, we overreacted. But why? Because if we've been traumatized, our nervous system is already queued up. It's always queued up because we're constantly in our stress response or that fight, flight, freeze reaction. So any small thing can set us off, right? We can feel overwhelmed. I can be super jumpy. If I smell something that reminds me of the time, maybe it's like one of those horrible tree smell things in cars, because my boyfriend had that in his car when he took me on that horrible drive. If I smell that tree, I might brought back there. I'm triggered and I feel that uptick of maybe it's adrenaline, maybe my palms get sweaty, right? My heart can race. If we notice any of those signs and symptoms, we've probably been traumatized. There are also things like avoiding anything that reminds us of something. Let's say, that I don't know, we were assaulted in an alleyway many, many years ago. And, they stole from us and ran away, and we weren't physically harmed, but we were terrified and we were traumatized. Now, I may, because of that, refuse to walk down any alleyway, regardless of day or night. Or I might never want to go out alone again, right? We can find ourselves just avoiding anything that could trigger us or remind us of that time. So notice if you're doing some of those things. I've heard from a lot of my viewers, unfortunately, because of the pandemic and losing someone to COVID, they haven't been keeping up with their doctor's appointments because they don't like to go into any medical facility because it just is too over them, right? It kind of is a reminder of what's been taking place. So just pay attention to things that you might be avoiding that you used to possibly not. And then, the distressing memories that can come up with it. I talked a little bit about flashbacks, but know that if we have been traumatized, memories aren't always linear. They don't always make sense. They're not always this nice narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. We can find that we just have these little flashes of memory or like a picture. A lot of my viewers have said that their trauma memories can feel very fragmented and it can be like a body response, right? We can feel it in our body, even though we're not really sure where it comes from and we can't always attach it to something. And I know that a lot of people out there are probably like, well, if you can't really remember it, then can you be traumatized by it? Like, if I don't really have memory, then what am I going to work through in therapy? Now, at the end of this, I'm going to get into treatment options, but I want you to know that trauma memory is always confusing like that. Sometimes the memories don't exist in the way that we think of a memory, but I'm here to tell you that cellular memory is a thing. And a beautiful, wonderful book is The Body Keeps the Score. And they talk about how you can still experience trauma in your body. And even if we don't remember it fully, we still have been traumatized. And it is still something that we should work through in therapy. So I just want to put that out there. And then a couple other symptoms of PTSD are things like struggling with concentration, issues with our sleep. It might be because of the nightmares, like I talked about, having nightmares about my own experience, but it could just be the fact that you struggle to fall asleep and you struggle to stay asleep, and you never used to have issues like that. Some people, especially my audience, have reported that they wake up like, in a shock, but they don't have any memory of what the dream or nightmare was, and they don't know why they feel so overwhelmed. Some people can even have night terrors where you like wake up screaming. And all of these can be signs and symptoms of PTSD. So if you're experiencing any, and even in an appetite, throw that one out there. I am an eating disorder specialist by trade, and I think I'm always acutely aware of our hunger fullness cues and whether we are forgetting to eat because we're so stressed out, or if we're eating too much as a way to numb out from what we feel, right? We can use food and even exercise and shopping and a lot of other things in our life to try to numb out. Or if our drug and alcohol use has gone up, those are all things we want to just be aware of and know that those can all be kind of these red flags or signs and symptoms of PTSD. Now, as always, I want to talk about what it can, what we can do now, right? My whole channel and the reason that it exists in the first place is because I wanted to help people where they're at. I wanted to be able to offer some tips and tools and things that you can do today to help yourself feel better. And If any of this resonated with you, I mean, like I said, I believe that all of us have been traumatized because of the pandemic and what's been going on in our world. We can all benefit from my tip, seeking professional help. And I know a lot of people will say, well, I can't afford that, or I can't make the time, or I don't even know how to go about looking for someone. And I'll get into that, don't worry. But getting professional help sooner rather than later is so important. Because just like anything, if I go to the doctor because I'm like, have a little tickle in my throat and I'm just feeling a little run down, I could catch that virus or maybe a cold that I'm getting. Not, I guess catch is the wrong word, but I could be diagnosed with something more earlier on, and I could get treatment quickly, and I could feel better more quickly. And your mental health is no different. I don't know why we talk about mental health and physical health in such different ways when they're all part of the same system and work so just one can't exist without the other, right? It's a symbiotic relationship, and we should treat our mental health the same. So if we're having some symptoms, we should reach out now, because there are online resources like Talkspace and BetterHelp, and almost all clinicians that I know now are doing a lot of their therapy online in general. So even if you're in a rural area, you'll still have access to people in the cities as long as you're within the same states because of our licenses and stuff like that. So seeking professional help quickly is really the best. I mean, I even think of it in relation to like cancer treatment, right? If we catch it early and treat it, it's better. And the same goes for our mental health and our symptoms of PTSD or whatever else we might be struggling with. Then my second tip, and the one that I cannot talk enough about on my channel in general, is building up our resilience. Now, in therapy, a lot of therapists will call this your window of tolerance. I don't know why we have these weird phrases that we use to describe things like your ability to weather life's storms. That's really what it means. That's what resilience is. When things can happen to us that are bad and feels like the world is just shoving us down, but we're able to dust ourselves off and get back up again. Now, the basics of resilience is what we kind of, I mean, I guess before self-care became such a marketing word, it's just basic self-care. So take the marketing out of it. There's no face masks you need to buy. You don't need to spend $100 on a massage or $5,000 on a vacation. You can just use this acronym, HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I love it because it's like, stop, halt. Before you do anything or make any other decisions, let's consider, have I eaten in the last 3 to 4 hours? I don't know about you, but if I haven't eaten in the last 3 to 4 hours, nothing good is going to come of that. I'm only going to be more short tempered. I'm not going to be able to think clearly. It's going to be terrible. Even before I started this talk, I had a snack because it's almost lunchtime and I had to have my snack. So check in with your hunger and fullness. Angry. Have we had something happen to us recently that has caused us to just be so agitated? Do we need to vent it to someone like a therapist or a best friend? Or maybe we just need to journal about it. I love to write, like physically, not but like nasty things and tear it up. It just helps me feel better. It feels cathartic to get it out. So check in. Just something you need to process or vent about? Maybe you need to scream an angry song in your car. No judgment. I've done that before. Maybe we scream into a pillow. Do whatever you need to do. Now the L. Remember HALT, hungry, angry, lonely. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, this has been the thing that I've struggled with myself and my patients the most, is because a lot of us are more disconnected than we used to be from our friends and family and our support systems. Should we reach out to someone? Can we send a text? If we're feeling lonely, that can cause us to act in ways we normally wouldn't, right? If I'm lonely, I can be more clingy. I might be an overshare. Have you ever done that? If you haven't talked to a person in a long time and then you talk to someone for work and then you share everything about what's going on in your life, frankly, because you just need to talk to someone? That's not really a healthy boundary, right? We don't want to mix personal and business all the time and be what my sister, sometimes you have verbal diarrhea. And I was like, that's a horrible word, but also kind of true sometimes. And so check in with your loneliness level. Do we need to be more connected? Are there ways that we can kind of throw out those little lures to people in our life that are supportive and loving and let them know that we need that connection and make time for that connection? And then the final is the T. I'm tired. Have you slept well? Have you slept at least 8 hours? I personally, my husband and I just got a puppy, and she gets up earlier than I would like to get up. And I have had to force myself just recently in the last like 3 or 4 days. We only had her for 2 months, but I was like, I cannot keep living in this like spaced out, not getting enough sleep kind of life. I've got to go to bed earlier. And so around 10:30, I start like moving myself towards bed. Otherwise, I'll stay up too late and pay for it. So are you getting enough sleep? Are you able to fall asleep and stay asleep? Is that something maybe we should look into, doing some kind of routine before bedtime, or talk to our doctor about it if we have sleep apnea or things that we could try to take care of. Check in on those things. And then I also want to throw out there to make sure that we're taking care of our physical health. Do we have an illness that needs tending to, or an appointment we need to make to finally get that bump on our arm checked out because it's keeping us up at night with worry thoughts? Doing these basic self-care things helps build up our resilience so that when life throws things our way, like it always does, we can weather that storm, right? Instead of letting that wave crash into us and knock us over, we're able to ride it right along. And like I said, I'm going to get into finally some of the ways that we can choose the right treatment. So I hear all the time, well, what if I have been traumatized? How do I find the right therapist? How do I make sure that I'm getting into the right type of therapy? And I blame all the people in my field, myself included, for having all these acronyms and weird names for types of therapy that just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, what is schema therapy? What is EMDR? Why are they making me follow their finger with my eyes? What the heck is that? And does that make me feel better? Or do I just have to talk it out? Well, when it comes to trauma treatment, you want to make sure that your therapist is a trauma specialist. And the best way to do that is to call them and ask them, or check out their website. I know that a lot of people are like, well, I don't really want to look at their website. Like, that doesn't even give me any information. It'll give you a lot of information. First of all, therapists usually don't have a ton of money floating around where they can pay someone to create this amazing website and write all the copy for them. Usually they're using something like Squarespace, they're doing their best, and they're writing it themselves. So you can get a feel for them just by reading their bio, what their training is. There's usually a lot of information out there. So you can get your list from your insurance company, pick a few, look up, see if they have websites. You can read online, check somebody out, see, get a good feel for them. See if it says if they're a trauma specialist. When you call them to make an appointment, you can say, I read online, it says you're a trauma specialist. Can you tell me what your training is? They might say, I do EMDR or some experiencing or schema. There's a different trauma treatments out there, but it's important that we ask the questions so that we make sure we're getting the right help, right? We wouldn't go see a foot doctor or podiatrist when we have a heart problem. We need to see a cardiologist. And it's important that we get the right type of clinician to help us with what we're struggling with. And there's also the key components of a good therapeutic relationship. And a therapist shouldn't be available to us all the time, right? We need to have a therapist that has healthy boundaries, meaning we shouldn't be calling them all the time or texting them all the time or them telling us that they're available to us 24/7. We want to find a therapist we feel connected to, who hears us, that understands us, and has that healthy boundary between when they're available and when they're not, and communicates that to us, right? Our therapist should also have a treatment plan that they're working on with us. This doesn't mean it has to be like this formal treatment plan, but it should be something to the effect of, what are your goals for therapy? Okay, we'll look back from that and come up with some of the steps and things that we should work on together. And they should also let you know how you're doing in the process. If you're feeling kind of stuck and you let them know, they should say, hey, well, think about it. When you first came in, we were working on X, Y, or Z. Now we're doing this, and look how far you've come. And maybe we should reassess your goals, right? A therapist should be working with you, not way ahead of you, judging where your progress is and telling you need to move faster, or behind you where you feel like you're working harder than your therapist and they keep not showing up or canceling your appointments or forgetting important aspects of your life. Finding that right fit, we actually know through research, gives us the best outcome in therapy. So even though obviously I know we want to have a specialist and that's like the first component, it's also important that we have that good relationship. And I know I mentioned a lot of different types of trauma treatment. We can dig into those more if you have questions about them. I'm happy to. And YouTube channel, I talk about what EMDR, somatic experiencing, is. Just know that if one treatment doesn't work for you, if talk therapy isn't enough, spoilers, it's not for a majority of people. About 60% of people find that's not enough when it comes to trauma work. We're going to need something additional. Know that you have a lot of options out there. The important part is that you reach out, you speak up, because with help, it can and will get better.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was such a great overview, and you helped us walk through what is trauma, how do we know if we've been traumatized, tangible tips. I really like the HALT protocol. Use that a lot clinically myself. It's great, and as well as tips for finding the right treatment. So, for those in the live audience, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'm going to do a little bit of an interview right now with Katie, but after that interview is over, we will have audience Q&A for your questions. All right. So let's go ahead and lean in. What I'd like to know, Katie, is what actually inspired you to write your book, Traumatized?
To be honest, it was my audience. I specialize in my practice, like I said, I specialize in eating disorder treatment and actually the treatment of self-injuries. So I do a lot of what's known as dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And I don't need to get into that too much, but in my time with my patients, a lot of them had underlying trauma. I found this common thread. And then when I started my work online, there's this common thread again. And I found that throughout all of the issues that people would bring to me, time and time again, I was finding this underlying thread of trauma.
Mm.
And so back in 2019, ironically enough, it was I put together the proposal with my agent because I said, I feel like I'm just seeing it everywhere. I feel like I hear about it all the time. Whenever I ask my audience for questions, they're always trauma based in some way, or they always go back to this root of childhood trauma or attachment. And so I really just found like it was everywhere I turned. No matter what I was working on, there was always some kind of trauma focus there. And so we started putting together the chapters. I started considering what I felt like people didn't know about it, because the reason I kind of shared that personal story at the beginning is because a lot of people have been in traumatizing situations and we just kind of brush them off. We minimize, we invalidate. Oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. But even before the pandemic, I had estimated, I was talking with, my agent when we were putting together the proposal. I was like, I think at least 65-70% of people have been traumatized in some way. They just don't know it yet. And we haven't really recognized it. And that's why we have all these other symptoms, right? That's why depression rates and anxiety rates are high. And so anyways, that's really why, is just because I felt like it was everywhere I turned and no one's really talking about it in a real relatable way. And I just felt like that's something that I could offer.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And that stat you threw out about, 60-70% of people have been traumatized in some way, but may not recognize it. I imagine that's different than folks that would actually have a diagnosable condition of PTSD. Can you talk to us about the difference between traumatized and then what would designate sort of that PTSD diagnosis?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, when it comes to diagnoses, we can love or hate the DSM or the ICD-11. Those are just diagnostic manuals, and they can be so limiting. And sometimes I feel like my patients, are definitely struggling, but they just don't quite fit the criteria. So we can have symptoms of something without meeting the full criteria. And that's really how we would differentiate someone who had PTSD from someone who was traumatized, right? I would say that a majority of people will have some symptoms. Like I'll give myself as an example. When I got out of that car and I was really scared and I had some nightmares, then I was already in therapy, because I've been in therapy forever, since I was 15. And I talked to my therapist about it, and it went and it diminished. It was debilitating. It didn't affect my ability to function. And I, struggled with concentration for a long period of time. It didn't go on for 6 months or any number of amount of time that diagnostically it would require. So you would just say I was traumatized, but I didn't have PTSD. And so it's just going to depend on, and I always hate this though, because it's like going to depend on what symptoms you have and how long it lasts, and if it meets the
Right.
criteria for PTSD. But that's why I think it's important that we still acknowledge that we've been traumatized, and that still requires some processing and support. Does that answer the question? I know I'm like, I could
Absolutely.
go through
Yeah.
the symptoms, but
Right. No, I hear what you're saying. So there's a clinical threshold that has to be met for like a diagnosable condition, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take it seriously if we have been traumatized, to reach out and to get the help that we need. And it sounds like some of the treatment protocols may be similar, where we'd still want to work with somebody who's really a trauma informed counselor or specialist in that area to get help. Thank you.
yes.
That
Mhm.
definitely helps. Um, in writing your book, what did you learn from the process?
It was definitely different because it's my second book. I feel like the first book, it was almost like I was hit with a Mack truck. I didn't realize exactly how much work it would entail, which I know sounds totally naive, and I hadn't done it before, right? I was totally
Mhm.
green. I had no idea what I was doing. But so this one I came at at it with more organization, more focus, and I'd already purchased some books and done some research leading up to it because I kind of knew what was in store for me. But I will be honest, the chapter, I think it's chapter 9 about trauma memories, that one was super fun and super interesting to read about. Yes, the science of trauma memories, chapter 9, because it was something that I personally, I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a neuroscientist. I've read certain things and I understand like our limbic system and our amygdala, which is what does that fight flight response and kind of push into that, where we can feel like our adrenaline pumping and we want to run away. I knew all of that, but I didn't really understand why trauma memories were hard to recall, where they think they're stored in the brain. All of that was super fascinating and interesting to research and write about. And it also, I also added in something in the chapter about childhood trauma about the ACEs study. If anybody doesn't know what the
Mhm.
ACEs study, it's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It was back in 1996, I think. I might be off by a year or two. Um, but Kaiser Permanente did this study, and looking at the questionnaire from the ACEs study, I think will shock a lot of people. They might, again, not realize that they've been traumatized, and that can just shine a light on some of the things we've been through. So those two things were really interesting for me to learn about and revisit and research and dig into. And I feel like in all the time even when I'm creating videos online, it's a I learn so much, and it's also really helpful for me personally, as hopefully as much as it is for the audience.
Well, certainly we benefit from it. I'm benefiting from it. I have your book, thank you. And um, definitely kind of appreciate all the work that you put into the process. Is there anything you wish you would have added to the book that you'd want folks to know that you didn't add?
There were a couple things that, like, got left on the editing room floor, and one of them that my editor was right, it didn't fit where I was trying to fit it, and I wasn't really sure where it belonged, is trauma bonds. I talked briefly about them kind of in the part there's a chapter about attachment, and I talk about them a little bit there, but I really think that trauma bonds are important for people to understand, and if any of you are wondering what that is, a trauma bond is really something that we form with our abuser or someone who's harming us. We bond with them as a way to essentially protect ourselves from future harm. And I mean, so because if we're abused when we're very young, we might not understand the dynamics of relationships or love. And so we can think that that abusive relationship is love and is the only connection maybe we have around us. And so we can bond to them that way, anyways. And I wished I could have like included more of that in the book, but every time I was writing a chapter, I felt like each chapter could be an entire book. And so it just felt like there was so much out there to talk about. And I feel like trauma bonds are something that a lot of people don't understand and don't talk about, which is, then I created a video about it for my channel because I was like, it needs to be out into the world and people need to understand. And I really wish I could have included more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. The editing process, I imagine, is hard, having to make very difficult decisions about what to leave in and what to take out. I imagine
Yeah.
there's so much more. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're always, because it's like my book baby, so I'm definitely more attached to it than my is. And then talking about the DSM and the ICD-11, like why they're always out of date and why I don't. I appreciate them as a starting point, but I don't. They're not the end all be all. And he didn't think that was necessary. He's like, that's like insider baseball. People don't need to know about that. And I'm like, but I did. I thought it was helpful. But some things you have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. A lot of letting go in the process that
Yeah.
can certainly be hard to do, but yeah, a good skill. So you talked earlier about some of the treatment options, and yeah, like you talked a lot about the goodness of fit with the therapist, which I thought was really great. There's so many treatment options right out there. How do you know if you've chosen the right treatment fit once you've started?
Mm. I think it's all in the progress. And I know people think like, oh, I want to feel better right away, right? In a way, we kind of have the medical model applied to therapy, and it's not quite the same. It's still for 4 days, and your infection will be gone. When it comes to therapy, and this is kind of the sucky thing about it. At the beginning, it can be harder at first, right? We can feel kind of worse at first because we're finally digging into all the stuff we've maybe been just like stuffing down and trying to forget about, but we feel connected to our therapist. We're working towards the
Mhm.
goals that we know we want to achieve. And over time, we do find ourselves either A, feeling slightly better. I always talk about like the 1 or 2%. That's all I'm looking for, just a little improvement. Maybe we were able to sleep a little bit more soundly, or so feeling a little bit better, or we have some more tools that we can use during our day. Because
Mhm.
sometimes it takes a little while for us to actually start feeling better, which I know that sucks, but I want to be honest. I want to set anybody up for failure thinking that you're going to, go in for therapy and presto fixo the next day, everything is better. But you hopefully will come away with mental shifts and feeling like, oh, I know my therapist said when I feel this way, just to jot some things down. So I'm going to do that. And if you feel like you have those things, you empowered by that, those choices and those tools and resources, that's really all. That's like the baseline. That's what I think, means you're with a good therapist who's good at their job and you feel connected. And, kind of all those things I was talking about, like working towards those goals, I think is really important. And unfortunately, it takes time, but it's worth it.
I really hear you on that. That's so helpful to think about, certainly in my work as a clinician myself, but also for me as being the client.
Mhm.
I have definitely noticed that incremental progress is so important, but that it doesn't always feel good during the process, right? So sometimes therapy is really, really hard and takes a lot out of us. So I appreciate your attention to that incremental progress and making sure there's still that good bond and trust with a
Yeah.
therapist. And of course, the tangible tips, because we're always, that's the goal, learning skills and therapy to help improve our life. So I
Yeah, I
really
love that you
appreciate
said
that.
that it's hard because it is hard, and I think people sometimes think that it'll be easy, but behavioral change is hard, and I've been in therapy, like I said, off and on since I was 15, so trust me when I tell you I know that when your urge is to do that thing that way and you're like, "Oh, no, I'm not supposed to do that anymore," that's really uncomfortable, and it can be really hard, especially if we're trying to break, like, relationship patterns. We're like, "But I'm not
Mm.
interested in that person." Your therapist is probably like, "Let's just give it some time." There are some things that are gonna be really difficult, but little by little, we'll get there.
Yeah, thank you. Um, there is something that was referenced in your book, which I know we haven't touched on yet today, and that really is our relationship with online usage and social media. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about that and how that affects our mental health.
Yeah, it's again, I had no idea about the whistleblower, and I would have included that had I known, since there's all this research now supporting what we logically already knew, right? And through talking to people, I already knew. But it's really important for us to pay attention to what we digest online. Like, we can talk all day and night about, like, eating organic food and making sure we exercise and getting sleep, right? All those things I'm talking about with the HALT acronym, even in general, we can work on all that. But if day and night we're on our phone and we're just scrolling through things that are causing us to judge our life in a bad way, or things that are really hurtful and harmful, especially now with media being very divided, we can get really amped up through watching the news or being on Instagram or some other social media platform. If you find yourself feeling worse after spending time online, then I'd encourage you to do some housekeeping. In the book, I talk about the importance of, like, muting people. So if you don't feel like you can unfollow people, because they're members of your family, it's okay to mute them for a little while. If they make mention, which, I mean, I can't imagine someone would, but there's always that one, like, "You haven't liked any of my pictures or commented on my status updates," someone might say something like that. I think it's completely appropriate to just say, "I'm not spending as much time online anymore. I haven't been feeling my best, I'm just trying to work on that." I can't think of a reason why someone wouldn't accept that and wouldn't be like, "Oh, okay, just wanna make sure you're okay," right? They're probably just checking in, or it might be their own need for attention, but whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's just important that we pay attention to how we feel before and after and make adjustments as needed. I've muted a lot of people. I've unfollowed people. If someone leaves a mean comment, because 'cause I'm out there online, right? I block them right away. I don't have any, who cares? People don't have a right to just throw anything at us, and so just being more mindful of that, I really think, can help us all utilize social media in a way that makes it better versus makes us feel worse. Because I know there's a ton of benefits to social media, right? Like connectivity and community. That's like what I thrive on. And that's what my whole, my community online is all. I have really encouraged them all to be supportive of one another. And that connection reminder we're not alone is really powerful. But We just need to make sure that we're weeding out kind of all the things that are harming us and causing us to think more poorly about ourselves and our situation.
Yeah, I really appreciate you talking about sort of creating and maintaining those healthy boundaries with our online usage and social media usage. And the way you talk about it reminds me of the product and having a relationship with a product, almost the way you would a person. And there are things that the product can do to enhance our lives and give us energy, and things that the product can do to drain our lives and pull that energy down. And paying attention to, I imagine, what's helpful and leaning into those spaces, and what's less helpful or harmful, and then avoiding those or drawing those more firmer lines in the sand. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that perspective. And it's something that, I mean, I didn't grow up with social media. It started when I
Me
think I,
neither.
not to date
Thank
myself,
God
but
also.
I was a little older by the time I got my first, I think I was in grad school when I got a Facebook account. And so it's interesting also to think through all the young folks growing up with social media nowadays, and thinking through the importance of teaching them these principles that you're talking about from a young age, so that they don't get kind of caught up, especially when their brains are still developing and maturing in that way. So
Yeah, because that's the thing about teenagers and younger children is it's like we struggle with impulse control in general. I mean, if you just think back to yourself at that age, you're like, why did I do that? What was I thinking then? Our brain's not fully formed. To be honest, it's not fully formed. We're not able to always make thoughtful decisions, and social media really exploit that. And so it's just, being more mindful.
yeah, absolutely. Now, before we transition into the audience Q&A, which folks, please continue to put your questions. We should have time to get to some of them. Um, what tips do you have on how to support others who may have experienced trauma? Because I know we've talked
Yeah,
a
that's
lot
a
about how to support ourselves, but that next step.
yeah, that's a great question. And the truth is just checking in and showing up. So a lot of people feel like, and I'm just making assumptions because I've heard this from my audience a lot, is that we feel like we have to come with answers or we have to come to fix what's going on. And I'm here to tell you, you don't. And it's actually better if you don't. Because most people, when we're having a tough time, I think we could all attest to this, is that I don't really need anybody telling me what to do. Sometimes I just need someone to listen. Right. And I've talked about this on my channel probably years ago now at this point, but listening to learn instead of listening to fix. And it does take kind of a mental shift to just, I want to listen to learn more about what their experience is. Can I ask questions like, so that must be really hard. How are you feeling now? Are you sleeping okay? Right? We can ask some questions just to see how they're doing, not to come up with an answer or to fix it, but just to learn. And going into that kind of mindset when you're there to support a friend who's struggling, I think is really key. And a lot of times people just want someone just to be there, like pick up some, Chinese takeout and let's watch some Netflix. We don't have to have some in-depth conversation. They might be too tired for that. We also don't need to go out because they might be too tired to get dressed up and do that. We can just show up and be there. And then another thing you can do is you can offer support where they need it. So if they're already like, "Oh, I was thinking about going to therapy," we can even mention our own like, "Hey, I've been in therapy. Do you think that might be beneficial to you?" We can't make someone go and we can't make someone change, but we can bring up potential and then support those decisions if they make them. So if they want to go to therapy, you can say, "Oh, if you need a ride, I can take you." Or if you need, especially if this is like your child, you can say, "I'm happy to cover copay and get you there." Right? We can offer the support structure and the support system to assist them in getting the help that they need, but we can't make someone get better. We can't make someone go to therapy or do the work or, stop doing some of the behaviors we so clearly see are detrimental to their life. We can just show up, be supportive, and help them in any way we can at making those good decisions.
Yeah, I imagine it's so hard. And I imagine, as I'm hearing you talk about it, it sounds like a lot of those tips would also be applicable if someone, we suspect a loved one or a friend is traumatized, but they may not be aware. If
Yeah.
all the tips that you're saying are very about like being there, showing up, showing support, supporting them in the way that they need, or with logistics, rather than, like you said, not trying to fix it or not trying to kind of find the solution. Right.
Yeah, Yeah, and even listening to learn is best when we're even having arguments with loved ones too. Like any kind of conflict or any kind of issue, it always benefits us just listening to learn. We don't have to listen to win or to fix. We can just listen to learn.
Yeah, it's a hard skill to practice, I think, for many
Oh
people.
yeah.
Human nature is like, I just wanna take away their suffering. I just wanna take away
Mhm.
their pain, and it's so hard to be in that suffering and in their pain with them, but that's a lot of what empathy is really about, is
Yeah.
being there with them in that process.
Agreed. It is definitely a new muscle if you try to just
Yeah.
listen to learn. I always just try to think I'm taking a class on whatever it is they're gonna teach me,
Oh, there
and
you
then just
go.
kind of take that student type of, I don't know, perspective.
I
It
like
helps
that
a little
approach
bit.
a lot. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. That's a great approach, to be the student, have a student mentality. I love it. Well, those are the interview questions I have for
Okay.
you today, but I want to make sure we leave time for our audience questions. Is there anything burning on your mind that you want to share before we shift to the audience questions? So,
Nothing comes to mind. If anything pops up, I'll let you know, but so far I feel like
awesome.
we've covered a lot of ground.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. So, we will go ahead and shift to audience Q&A. So this is from Guillermo. For finding the right fit on therapy, you mentioned trauma practice and other aspects like pace. You also mentioned that it's better to seek help early. How do you recommend we tackle this trade-off?
I think, I mean, to be honest, the most important thing is seeking help early, and couple let me know, Guillermo, if I don't answer the question fully, because I feel like there's a lot of places I could take this, but getting help early allows for a lot of things. First of all, it prevents us from having our mental health or mental illness affect our life in more ways, right? Because it can, the longer it goes on, just like an illness, the worse it can get. We want to make sure that we get in there early. And another side to that is not only does it allow us to not have it affect our life more, it also allows us to maybe try out a couple of therapists because the first one that you see might not be the right fit. Like I'm not the best for everyone. Not everyone's going to like me. I might not be have the right background or be the right specialist, or they might just not like me, right? People are people, and I don't take offense to that. We need to find someone that we just feel, when you meet somebody at a party and you're like, I like them. I think they're cool. I want you to have that kind of feeling, that little spark. Not like I love them, oh my god, I need to see them all the time, but just that like I'd like to get to know them more. Be cool. I want you to have that kind of comfortability factor with them when you see them. Now, yes, therapy is super uncomfortable, but I want you to at least feel like I could go back and do that again. And looking for that may take a few trials. And that's why earlier is better. And even as think of those first few sessions as like interviews for them. You can ask them questions about their trauma specialty and what type of therapies they offer because most therapists will do more than just one style or they could be like me where I just kind of pick and choose from others as I do mostly CBT and DBT type of work in my practice, but you know I'll do a good gestalt or other. I don't want to get into the weeds of therapy talk, but like other types of therapy I can utilize some of the tools from those as well. And if you are looking for something specific, I can read up on it or I can refer you out to someone else who is better equipped. And so all in all, I feel like that's why it's really important that we seek it early because it gives us an opportunity to find the right fit before it causes us any more harm, right? I hope I did I answer
Yeah.
that question thoroughly? I feel like
I think you
there were
did. Yeah, no,
quite
this was great. And what I
uh,
appreciate is you calling out the two-way street that really happens in the first couple of sessions with a new therapist. That yes, there's a lot of questions new therapists will ask you to get to know you
mhm,
and to get to know your background. But similar to how I practiced when I was doing clinical work, I would also leave time and space for the client to ask questions of me. And so I think that's so important that clinicians allow for that space and that folks should feel comfortable. Of course, not digging into like personal details of the
mhm. Yeah,
therapist, but
yeah, I
but
was
digging
thinking that too. I'm like, not like how many kids do you have, where do you live, or anything like
right,
but
not like
more
that.
like yeah.
Like, how do you practice? What's your style? What goals do you want to set together? How do you feel like the information I'm giving you is that telling you about kind of what my needs might be, and that's going to give you just so much information about the therapist and how they respond, and it's certainly going to inform, like you said, that comfort level. I like that you use the word spark. That spark
Mhm.
that you want to feel with them. All right, so let's move on to the next audience question. This is from Farah. What does being healed from trauma look or feel like? I love
That's
that
a great
question.
question. Yeah, I love that question. And the truth about it, the best way I've ever heard it described, I think it was by my good friend Dr. Alexa Altman, who is a trauma specialist, is that the things that used to trigger us, right? So when we've been through a trauma, like I was talking about in my talk, is like everything with our five senses can be triggering. So things that we smell, things that we see, right? Any of those sensations can trigger memories, or we can feel overwhelmed. We can want to cry, we can want to scream, run away, we can have a panic attack, we can dissociate, which is when like our brain pulls us out of ourself a little bit. It's like, this is too much. It pulls the ripcord. And if any of that stuff is happening, healed from anymore, because we won't be as emotionally charged. And I just like that term, emotionally charged, because so often we think, well, everything has to be perfect and my life has to be in this amazing order in order for me to be healed. But I'm here to tell you that unfortunately life doesn't always tie up into a nice pretty bow, but we will be able to be around certain things that we would never have thought we'd be able to be around, and we find ourselves calm and present and able to stay there. And so that's really what I look for with my patients, and what I've talked online about is just trying to work through. I mean, exposure therapy is a great option when it comes to trauma treatment. I know everybody just hid under their desks. It's like, that sounds super uncomfortable, but exposing ourselves little by little to the things that are overwhelming to our system makes our world bigger, right? We can do more, we can see more, we can be more places, again, without that emotional charge. So we're able to be calm and okay. And I think that's really the where, for the most, like 99% of the time, or at least like 90% of the time, we don't feel that hypervigilance, that overwhelm. We can participate in life freely without any of those trauma triggers.
Yeah, yeah. The key takeaway that you mentioned a couple times there is feeling less emotionally charged, which is so great to call out. And it sounds like, the memories might still be there, but hopefully showing up less frequently and less intrusive ways. And some of the other things you mentioned earlier in the talk, like the hypervigilance and the nightmares and all of that kind of tamping down, and that emotional charge around situations that may have otherwise triggered you, being dampened down. I imagine it's a very freeing experience once people can get to that place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's from what I've heard from my patients and viewers, they say that like having trauma and having PTSD, it's just so palpable, is
Mhm.
exhausting.
Mhm.
And when you've worked through it, it's like a nice, much needed vacation because it's just, think of being on edge all that time. It takes so much energy out of your system. And even simple tasks like going to the grocery store or dropping things off at the post office can be overwhelming. And so getting that break from it can just be such a nice vacation.
Yeah. All right, let's go to our next question.
Okay.
It's from Gail. How do you suggest for someone to go to therapy with you
Mm.
if you've experienced the exact same trauma?
It's tricky if you're wanting someone to go with you. It depends on the dynamic. So first of all, if you're a couple or in the same nuclear family, whatever you define that is, 'cause I know culturally things can be different for a lot of people. That's when I think it benefits us most to go to therapy at the same time with the same therapist, because there's a lot of dynamics between us that will need to be worked out. And so I guess the best way to go about asking them is just to call out a couple of the things that are upsetting you. And I don't mean in a judgmental finger pointy way. I mean more like, hey, I haven't been feeling very connected, or I, using these I statements is key. I really would like to improve our communication, or I would like to feel closer to you. Connection and closeness, the intimacy is usually what's missing and what we're wanting, and why we would want to go to therapy in general, just FYI. Even though we may not realize that's what it is. But calling that out and saying, these are the things that I'm wanting, because they keep it kind of positive, right? We're like solution focused. I want these things. Would you consider going to therapy with me? I think it could help us get there. And so we're future focused. We're looking at the thing that we want. We're telling them what our goals are. It's we're being good salespeople. It sounds a little bit better than, I work with you all the time, make me so angry. want to talk to someone about how angry you make me. People aren't so apt to sign up for that. So I think that's usually an
Yeah.
easier way in. But I do want to throw out there that if you are seeing someone as a couple or as a family, I do think it's beneficial to see someone individually as well, because we're going to have our own stuff. Even though we've been, like the question said, you've been through the same trauma, a lot of people go through the exact same situation and have different perspectives and different, essentially, trauma responses from it. Because going back to what I talked about earlier, like the resilience factor, right? Like our ability to weather life storms. Unfortunately, some of us just have more of it, whether it's because we work to build it up, doing all those things, take care of ourselves, or we're just naturally more inclined. I know it sucks when there's things like that where people are just more naturally inclined, but that's just how it is. And so, even though you both went through the same trauma, I just want you to know that they may not have the same experience as you, or feel like they need to talk about the same parts of it as you do. And that's why that individual therapy is also important, because you each should feel free to talk about your personal experience and the ripple effects of that in your own way. And sometimes with couples and families, there's not enough time usually in the hour to get to all of that. But I think bringing it up with I statements and keeping it very focused on what you're wanting to get out of it will, fingers crossed, get us the best result.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you say there's really space for both, for people to come with you to support you in therapy or to go together as a couple potentially, but also to really focus on that individual work as well for your own individualized treatment, to process your personal reactions to the event as well. Thank you. So
Mhm.
we have one final audience question. Go ahead and from Kiran. I hope I'm saying that name
Mm.
right. I apologize if I'm not. If you come from cultures that don't believe in therapy, how do you help family members understand the value of therapy?
Really tricky. And my best advice is to not try to have only one conversation about it. And I know this is hard, because especially, like, for instance, I have a couple close friends from different various cultures. One of my closest friends is from El Salvador, and her parents don't really believe in therapy, and also she's a therapist now too, so that's got its own, why would you, mija, why would you go into that kind of thing, all the judgment. But then another one of my girlfriends is from, she's Black, in the Black community they're like, go to church and talk to people about it there. Like, what are you talking about it to someone else, to a stranger? And I've told both of them, and it's so far been okay, is figuring out what your goals are for this, right? So write down what you would ideally like to happen. I'd like them to accept it. I'd like them to understand it. And maybe I'd like them to go into therapy themselves, maybe, right? And then we make another list. What do we think they're capable of? Hard, but I do this a lot with relationship life, is like sometimes I have these expectations or hopes, and the people that I have them for, it's just they can't meet them. And so I'm like setting them and myself up for failure. And so taking a little time to think about those things and look at the things that they can offer and how can we really tap into that. So maybe our mom always wants to make sure that we're happy in life. And so we can tap into that. We can say, "Yeah, mom, you've been noticing that I've been a little bit happier. It's because I've been, talking to someone. I've been seeing a therapist, and it helps me just put things in perspective," right? We keep it very short and sweet. We offer some little tidbit, and we know that this is an ongoing conversation. Because I think the problem, and I even fall into this trap personally, is I think that we can only talk about it once. Like, oh, I have to get everything out. I have to tell them all the reasons and why they're wrong and what we can do. And they shut down. People get, information overload or too many things they disagree with, and they close us out. But if instead we think of it as like these little seeds, I think it's the therapists, if anybody doesn't know, we like plant all these seeds and we try to water them all the time, and we're never sure which ones are going to bloom. We're waiting for our patients to, oh, and so it's kind of, think of it like that. Like I'm just planting a bunch of seeds, and I will see which ones will take hold. Maybe it's the part about me not being as reactive to them that they notice, and then I can attribute that to my therapy. Or maybe they've noticed that I, had a string, like myself, had a string of these like bad boyfriends. And my mom's like, seriously? And then finally you have one that they like. Oh, then we can attribute that. Or there are things that we can attribute back to therapy that I think can build this conversation into a bigger conversation about it. And we can't force people to change their minds, but we can show them the benefits, and hopefully they'll see that and then be able to, get on board with therapy as well. But also, just to wrap it up, I have to say we can't change people's minds. We can just show them the evidence and hope that they come to the same conclusion we did. And that's like that planting of the seed.
Yeah, the takeaway I'm hearing from this one is really patience, being patient and continuing kind of on that track and living through the change that therapy brings to you and using that modeled behavior and things that might work to see if it slowly over time can influence the different people since they're going to notice the changes hopefully for the better. Yeah.
Yep.
um, well, Katie, that is all the time we have today. I so appreciate you coming to talk about your book, your second book. And so I really hope everybody checks out Traumatized. Again, I know I have a copy. It's a great book. And please, all, yes, thank you. And beautiful cover as well.
Uh-huh.
I also really encourage people to check out Katie's YouTube channel, which has a lot of videos and resources. Like she said, there's videos that go more into trauma, other mental health conditions, other tips for therapy, different types of therapies. There's a lot of really good content there as well. So, Katie, thank you so much again for your time. Very valuable to hear all of your insights and to hear more about the process of your book. And thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.